Lane Kiffin selecting Caden Lee is proof that he is about to lead the SEC in receiving. Get ready, everyone.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast around. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. Also did a little time at WSMV in Nashville as well. On today's show, we talk about the 2025 Ole Miss Rebels and their postseason hopes. We dial into a realistic outcome if our 10-2 prediction becomes a reality. One big reason I am so high on this team, the weapons in the wide receiver room. This might be the best group of wide receivers Lane Kiffin has assembled since those 4 stars at Alabama made life absolutely miserable for defenses. But first, we discussed why hindsight proves it is crucial for Ole Miss and the SEC to bring Caden Lee to media days. He's been growing into an alpha dog since last season, and now he gets to turn loose a little bit. Alongside Austin Simmons, he is going to step fully into a leadership role. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. Do us a favor, like this episode, subscribe to this channel, comment on this episode. It costs nothing, but it keeps everything free. If you want to talk about keeping the trains moving, that is how that happens. And don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college and pro, is ready for you to select at the Locked On Network. So Caden Lee got selected to go to SEC Media Days, along with TJ Daugherty and Austin Simmons. And obviously, we're going to get into plenty of Austin Simmons. But I wanted to take this episode to actually talk about Caden Lee. Honeycomb, as he is affectionately known as a receiver. I think the Florida football scout, the Locked On recruiting expert, Brian Smith, actually followed him extensively during his high school recruiting. He loved Caden Lee. He saw all of this coming. Brian Smith is a huge fan of what Lane Kiffin is doing at Ole Miss, and he's a huge fan of what Caden Lee does as well. When you look at this, I think Caden Lee being selected for media days is kind of confirmation of his growth, kind of looking at what's going on to him taking the next step. This is the obvious next step. And it's a sign of confidence from Lane Kiffin in a high school athlete, something that people like to question all the time. And if you look at the history of a Lane Kiffin wide receiver, players like this tend to have extremely large years. There's a realistic opportunity for Caden Lee to be the leading receiver in the entire Southeastern Conference, leading Ole Miss to an SEC championship game or the playoffs. There is a world where that happens. Caden Lee in that role is absolutely crucial. There has to be a leader other than Austin Simmons on this football team. I am a huge fan of Austin Simmons. But if you look at his number, he's 19 to 32, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. Now, if you want to look at it clear, that's a better redshirt freshman number than Eli Manning had. That's better than Matt Corral put up. If you look at redshirt freshmen at Ole Miss, this is better than dang near all of them. But he is still a redshirt sophomore. He is still going to make his first start against Georgia State on August 30th. He still has some growing pains that he has to get through. I have no doubt that he will, but that is on the table. Somebody like Caden Lee allows for Austin Simmons to come along. He has confidence in Caden Lee. You saw that in his drive against the Georgia Bulldogs a year ago. Last season, Caden Lee had 57 catches, 874 yards, and 2 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns was Austin Simmons' first. But over the course of the year, Caden Lee became more and more indispensable in this Ole Miss offense. He became a security blanket of sorts in the absence of Trey Harris to Jackson Dart. I think Caden Lee will do something similar with Austin Simmons being the primary wide receiver. And Caden Lee has the ability to line up outside. He lines up inside, and he doesn't drop passes. He did not drop a pass that hit him in the hands a year ago. There were probably incomplete passes that were thrown his direction, but not one that was catchable. No dropped passes for Caden Lee. I think Caden Lee has a real shot to have 90 or so catches over the course of this season. I think this year has a chance to be a breakout year for Caden Lee as a junior. Someone who got his first start in the Peach Bowl against the number one defense in all of college football, the Penn State Nittany Lions, and he proceeded to light them up. And then the next year, he proceeded to light up everybody else in front of him. Listen, Lane Kiffin and the transfer portal, everybody knows the story. Everybody knows what's going on. This is a high school recruit that Lane Kiffin recruited to Ole Miss, gave him opportunities to develop. He developed and took the bull by the horns and has become a dominant wide receiver in one of the best wide receiver rooms in all of college football, if you believe Pro Football Focus. This is likely the best wide receiver room that Lane Kiffin has put together since he was at Alabama, when Jerry Jeudy and those guys were running around causing havoc on defenses. So Caden Lee being the alpha dog of this wide receiver unit kind of lets you know where this is going to go. Kind of lets you know how big of a year he is going to have. Kind of lets you know exactly what's there for a young quarterback in Austin Simmons that's unbelievably talented, by the way. My sources on the ground at the Manning Passing Academy said he blew people away throwing the football. Now, that's routes on air and all of that stuff, but he blew people away. Austin Simmons, again, we said it 15 times over the last year. He's a 1-1 talent at quarterback. That potential is there. He just needs to develop. And for him to develop, he needs a surefire wide receiver like Caden Lee. He needs some of the different wide receivers that are in the room. He needs a big tight end room, which is a big part of this Ole Miss wide receiver and pass catching group as a whole. Caden Lee is about to blow up in the SEC. He's about to have a monster year. 90 catches, 1,500 yards, and everybody's going to say, where did that come from? And if anybody remembers what 2020 was like at Ole Miss, if anybody remembers that year, that was Matt Corral and Elijah Moore. And Elijah Moore was that electric slot receiver that caught pass after pass after pass. I think he only played in 8 games that season, and he got nearly 100 receptions. He got the clipboard toss game against the South Carolina Lamecocks. Got that, Lamecocks? Right. I hope South Carolina fans are watching this. But the South Carolina Gamecocks. This Ole Miss offense is surrounded to go to a dominant wide receiver, and this might be the first truly dominant wide receiver on the inside that Ole Miss has had since Elijah Moore. They tried to move Dontario Drummond. He caught a lot of passes there. Jonathan Mingo was like purely on the outside, and Trey Harris was an outside wide receiver as well. This is an inside wide receiver that can do a lot of stuff. You can line him up in the backfield. He can run over routes. He can run Texas routes. Everything can be done on the inside with Caden Lee that you would want to be done. And on the outside, he can do that stuff as well. Caden Lee has a chance to be a really monster player in the Southeastern Conference this year, and everybody just needs to kind of get ready. You know, Caden Lee, he's just the appetizer. This wide receiver room might be the deepest and most explosive of Lane Kiffin's entire Ole Miss tenure. We'll break down why it could be his best yet next. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you are all about the baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the game. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and even makes regular season games feel like must-watch events. Like Ole Miss, they're 37.5-point favorites over the Georgia State Panthers in the opener at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. If that is something that gets your attention, that is available to you. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit thefanduel.com to get started. Whenever you look at Caden Lee, he is definitely the alpha in this wide receiver room, but he is not necessarily the main course in this wide receiver room. It's silly to think of, but whenever you look at what Caden Lee can be, he's probably not going to be the dominant player for Ole Miss this year on the outside. On the outside, that's Deshaun Stribling. Deshaun Stribling, he is somebody that transferred from Oklahoma State, got nearly 1,000 yards at the Oklahoma State Cowboys with Alan Bowman as a quarterback. You want to look at his career stats: 161 catches, 2,153 yards, and 17 touchdowns. He has all the gifts that you want a wide receiver to have, and he might completely break loose this year. He's the receiver that's going to have defenses extremely scared on the outside. He's going to be the guy that makes Caden Lee tick, because if you put Caden Lee and Deshaun Stribling on the same side, that makes a double team virtually impossible. Both these guys are contested catch makers. Both of these guys are somebody that can do some work in the middle of the field as well. Pretty good deal, right? PFF thinks so. There's another receiver, Harrison Wallace III, transferred into Ole Miss from Penn State. Another one that played with let's just say, an interesting quarterback. Everybody that's listened to the show knows that I'm not a true fan of Drew Aller, but Harrison Wallace, 46 catches, 720 yards, 4 touchdowns over the middle of the field in those 2 or 3 zones that Drew Aller is very proficient throwing the football in. A perfect NFL passer rating for Harrison Wallace. So over the middle of the field, contested catcher. When we talked to Austin Simmons a little bit earlier this year, he talked about Harrison Wallace as being a super fast player. He's out of Pike Road, Alabama, which is obviously the hometown of Quinshon Judkins. Harrison Wallace has a chance to really go off for Ole Miss. When you look at Deshaun Stribling, Harrison Wallace, that's pretty much a nice tandem on the outside when you add a Caden Lee on the inside of what's going on. There's other receivers that Ole Miss has as well. There's Deuce Alexander. There's a kid that transferred from West Virginia. You've got Caleb Cunningham. You've got Samari Reed. You've got Winston Watkins. You've got Dylan Alford, all fighting for the ball. This wide receiver unit is deep. It is oh so deep. And it would not surprise me at all if Caleb Cunningham and Dylan Alford or Winston Watkins, they have a role to play this season. They are some athletic guys, and when their number's called, you can count on them to pretty much make a play as well. But it's not just the wide receivers that makes the pass catchers and everything so dominant. Dae'Quan Wright, great friend of the podcast, been on the show. Last year, he had 27 catches, 394 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He was a dominant fixture in the Gator Bowl, and he was somebody that kind of took over the starting responsibilities of Caden Prieskorn fairly late in the season. Somebody, excellent hands. He has a rapport with Austin Simmons as well. We always talk about Caden Lee. Dae'Quan Wright got started with Austin Simmons as well. Look for Dae'Quan Wright and Caden Lee to jumpstart this wide receiver unit. At tight end, though, it's not all that they went and got. They didn't just go get Harrison Wallace. They didn't just go get Deshaun Stribling. Another tight end, Luke Haas, came from Arkansas, over there with the 3 players that transferred in. Another one that has a chance to really go off. We had Chris Mangum on the podcast a couple of days ago talking about specifically 12 personnel because a Luke Haas and a Dae'Quan Wright would be absolutely a weapon for this Ole Miss offense. And then they go get a guy like Trace Bruckler for a third tight end, somebody that can fill in, somebody that can do a little inline stuff, somebody that is a really good blocker, transferred in from the New Mexico Lobos. And this guy, he has a tight end body. He was a freshman, a 5-star that was recruited, went to Alabama for a year, transferred to Ole Miss. I guess he was there, roughly about a year. He's somebody that's 6'5", 230 pounds, and plays wide receiver, even though he has a tight end body. I think he compares pretty favorably to an Evan Ingram, somebody like that. So whenever we talk about him, just realize that we kind of view him as a jumbo wide receiver / hybrid type player. So we'll see exactly how that goes with Caleb Odom. He could be a weapon in the red zone, somebody that can absolutely help Austin Simmons out. And 12 and 13 personnel, that feels like something that this Ole Miss football team can do. That's 2 or 3 tight ends. You might see some 3 tight end sets. And with Joe Judge getting a little bit more influence on the offense, it'll be interesting to see if this offense goes the direction I think it will, and that is a little bit more pro style. I think this offense is going to look a little bit more like NFL offense. It's still going to be fast. The bones are still going to be what it has been for the last 5 years. But the difference that I'm talking about would be, say, the difference between last year's Ole Miss team and the 2022 Ole Miss team. 2 teams that played football really differently, but tempo and stuff like that, it all stayed the same. I think this team has a chance to be really good. And I think this team is in a really good spot to be really good. And a lot of that has to do with this wide receiver unit, an extremely special group of people. Should be pretty interesting. In our final segment, we have Ole Miss going 10-2 on this podcast. So what would the postseason look like if that holds true? We break down all of the possibilities. All right, so if you want to look at the games that we previewed and we talked about, this is what we came up with. We got Ole Miss starting 6-0, losing 2 road games in the middle of the season, winning out. Now, that doesn't account for injuries, and obviously a million different things can happen. But hey, it's a prediction. It's January or July. It's a podcast. Everybody's going to be okay. Ole Miss beating Georgia State at Kentucky, beating Arkansas against Tulane, beating LSU, and beating Washington State would surprise nobody. No, there is not a surprising result on this list. And anybody that says otherwise, they're just lying to you for clicks. So Ole Miss going 10-2, what would the postseason look like if they go 10-2? What would the postseason look like if Ole Miss is able to do exactly this? That is the question in my head, because if Ole Miss goes 6-2 in the SEC, that would probably likely mean that Atlanta is on the table, depending on what Georgia and Oklahoma does. You have the tiebreakers against the other teams, and Texas and Alabama would get a little bit weird with the tiebreakers and that. But 10-2 is definitely, you can make it to Atlanta on 10-2. You can absolutely make it to the playoffs as well. So 10-2 would get Ole Miss into the playoffs. 9-3, probably not so much. We saw that a year ago. Ole Miss was just on the outside looking in, going 9-3. But I guess it would depend on the 3 losses and when they occurred, because we all know the committee can be a little bit weird, and why not play into the committee's weirdness this time? But Ole Miss going 10-2 with exactly that, winning 4 games in November. That means closing hot. They're likely going to be about 9th in the country, maybe 8th in the country. And that's interesting, because if this happens, Ole Miss is in line to potentially host a first-round game, which if they would have beaten Florida, they would have hosted a first-round game a year ago. Not really a surprise to look at that either. But if that exact thing happens, and Ole Miss hosts a playoff game against the number 9 seed, or travels on the road to the number 8 seed, would be interesting. Would the committee set it up to where Ole Miss plays Alabama? Because Ole Miss isn't scheduled to play Alabama this season. Is that a game that they would put in just because they're all anti-SEC and they would laugh about that? Whoever lost that game, they wouldn't laugh. So it's interesting. If Ole Miss loses the game, they're likely in the same spot. They got the Citrus Bowl that they've never been to, potentially. They got the ReliaQuest Bowl, which used to be the Outback Bowl. They played there in 2000. The Gator Bowl, they played there a year ago. So after the Citrus Bowl is kind of just a conglomeration of bowl games for the Southeastern Conference, to where Ole Miss could finish just outside of the Citrus Bowl and end up in the Liberty Bowl, end up in the Texas Bowl, end up in the Music City Bowl, because there's not a tier system to bowl games the way they used to be. If Ole Miss goes 10-2, they are going to make the playoff. They'll probably host a playoff game, if we're going to be completely honest. They lose to Georgia, if they lose to Oklahoma and win 4 games in the month of November, they will be sitting pretty come Selection Sunday. But if Ole Miss loses a third game, if they drop that LSU game, if they drop that Florida game, if South Carolina gets them, then it becomes interesting. The bowl situation is absolutely weird. Everybody wants to talk about opt-outs and bowl games. The conferences are acting themselves like they don't matter. Everything is about the playoffs. And Ole Miss acting like everything is about the playoff is kind of a natural way to look at this, if we're going to be perfectly honest. Ole Miss needs to make the playoffs. Lane Kiffin needs to make the playoffs. And if he does that, this football team and him can raise another level. You talk about turning a corner, that would be the last corner to turn, if we're going to be real about that, is getting Ole Miss to the playoffs and potentially winning a college football playoff game. The Big 12 commissioner, the Big 12 media days, they're happening as we speak right now. And Brett Normark, the commissioner, said they are all in on the 5-11 model, just like the ACC will be as well. Brett Yormark says and acknowledges this model is not the best for us, but it could be if we get better, basically. That's essentially what he said. And it's one of those things to where people get mad about entitlements, okay, for lack of a better word, and don't vote their own interest. Yes, you're on food stamp, but you could be a millionaire in 10 years, so that estate tax is going to be a very big deal for you. That's a weird situation, the way people look at what's going on. The Big 12 and the ACC, they would get more teams in the playoff under Tony Petitti's 4-4-2-2-1-3 model. Just absolutely would. Any of the automatic qualifiers, they would get more teams in. I've seen a 4-4, 2.5, 2.5 that on Championship Sunday or Championship Saturday, the third place ACC and the third place Big 12 team, they actually play each other for the right for that. They have a confederation playoff that is happening in soccer for World Cup qualifying. That happens all over the world. And if you set these automatic bids up, you could change the coefficient. Nobody is saying that the way it is now is the way it's always going to be. There could be a change in the coefficient if you got better. But warning, if you do that, there could be a change in the coefficient if you get worse as well. Listen, everybody that watches this show knows that I'm actually on board with the Big Ten plan of the 4-4-2-2-1-3. Absolutely. And if you look on the roster, I think Fox has it up right now. Okay? Fox has it up right now. And if you look at that, you can see 15 of the 16 teams that got in or that would have got in 2024 last year would get in under each and every new model. The only difference is whether or not the 15th team gets in, whether or not an extra SEC team gets in, something like that. But if you want to talk about access and the playoffs and finding the stuff that really works, this model would absolutely work for you. And this is very big, honestly, really big. So we'll see exactly how it goes. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We are priding ourselves in having the most comprehensive perspectives out there, and that's why we're the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe us, type in Ole Miss podcast on Google and look how many times we come up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment to the show. It's completely free and helps the show stay that way. Your support means the world to us. For your second listen, check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on all of the rapid changes around college football's landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.